Bijat Tabino, everyone. Good day. I'm Sarah Sunshine Manning, and I am Nawa and Nama, and I'm a citizen of the Shoshone Paiute tribes of the Duck Valley Indian Reservation in Idaho and Nevada. And I'm also the Director of Communications here at Indian Collective. And welcome to the final panel of the NDN Changemaker Showcase, where we are featuring panel discussions with our second cohort of NDN Changemakers. So far, we've had 4 different panel discussions featuring several of the NDN Changemaker Fellows. And if you've missed any of those live streams, we'll be sure to drop the links to watch those previous panels in the chat. We started out the showcase actually yesterday with an opening session featuring opening remarks from NDN Collective President and CEO Nick Tilson and Managing Director of NDN Foundation, Gabby Strong. Then in that opening session, the 3 hosts of the showcase had a discussion about the vision and the intent of the NDN Changemaker Fellowship. And that conversation was between myself, Dr. Penelise Droz, and Nicole Yanis. That opening session was then followed by our first 2 panels on Decolonize, with Decolonize Part 1 and Part 2 happening yesterday. And so far today, we've had 2 more panels, Develop Part 1 and Develop Part 2. And then also, we've been incredibly honored to have enjoyed the musical entertainment of 3 phenomenal Indigenous musicians and artists, Mike Jordan, Lila June Johnston, and Mato Wayuhi, who will also be hearing at the end of this panel. And now to close out our inaugural NDN Changemaker Showcase, we'll be having a discussion with 4 of the NDN Changemaker Fellows for this panel, Defend. So we'll be joined by Edith, Andre, and Heber. Welcome to all of our Changemaker Fellows. We are also joined by 2 of our amazing language interpreters, Carolina and Rebecca. Thanks so much for being here today. And I'm really excited about this particular conversation because we're communicating with 2 of our relatives who are south of the so-called Mexico border, which we all acknowledge here at Indian Collective and throughout Indian country is a colonial construct that has divided Turtle Island and separated Indigenous nations who have interacted with each other since time immemorial. And then Andre Perez, who's Kanaka Maoli all the way over across the Pacific Ocean in Hawaii. And earlier today, we actually had a conversation. Our first conversation of the morning was with relatives to changemakers across the medicine line, the so-called border of the so-called US and so-called Canada. And so it's been really a treat and amazing as a part of this showcase to lift up some of the folks who we connect with and support through the fellowship that are beyond colonial borders. And so it's really an honor to close out this showcase with another conversation with Indigenous people from diverse communities. So to get started, we're going to have each of the fellows here with us today introduce themselves. And so if you could please start out by introducing yourself, your community, and a little bit of the work that you do. And we'll start with Edith.
She's speaking in her language. Good afternoon. I send you a warm greeting from the Nusavi people in our territory. My name is Edith, and we have been called Mixteco, but our original name is from where we come, our memory, and our roots. We are the people of the rain, and I'm saying hello to you from our territory and to share with you a few words. We are now in the process of revision of the work that we have to do to reconstruct our community using a space that's called Ticoso, and there we are working on 2 different levels with the weavers of women weavers, and then the other that's tied to the work with boys and girls in the collecting of knowledge. And then we think that this is a good starting point, and we are promoting this connection with our territory, especially based on our own food knowledge and our community health and traditional health, because many times this has been displaced by a Western vision or perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Edith. It is great to have you on here and really honored to connect with you. All right, we'll go next to Andre.
Aloha, mai kako. Aloha. My name is Andre Perez. I am originally from Koloa, Kauai. I reside on Oahu now in Hawaii. So my community is really the Hawaiian community spread out across the islands in Hawaii. And the work that I do is sort of a combination of synthesizing of political activism around sovereignty and independence, deoccupation from the US occupation of the Hawaiian Kingdom, but also bringing in strong elements of Hawaiian culture and spirituality into the work that we do. And we're also, we have a farm here on Oahu. And so we teach traditional farming practices, have a wood carving program to preserve and perpetuate the tradition of Hawaiian carving, mainly what we know today as tikis, which has been appropriated by tourism. Some of you may have seen tiki bars or tiki-themed water parks. And so those are carved images of our gods. And so one of the primary things that I do is I run a wood carving apprenticeship, but we also fuse that wood carving into our political activism and use our carving as part of direct action. A lot of the work is around environmental protection, land, water. Of course, we live on an island ecosystem which has finite resources, and it's always important to protect our land and water within this island ecosystem context. So that's a little bit about who I am and what I do, and I look forward to the conversation. Mahalo, thank you.
Thanks, Andre, and really good to see you again and hear about what you're up to. Okay, and last but not least, we will go to Heber.
He's speaking his language. Wish you all a good afternoon and a good path for you. I'm a Mayan indigenous person. I live in a community in the Bacalar community in Quintana Roo. I'm part of a seed collective called Muchayatwinisi, means we defend the seed, and it's a collective that has been around for 20 years where we're defending seeds and our territories. We have like seed festivals, we have meetings, we share knowledge, and I am also a son of the campesinos of the Yucatan Peninsula. I speak my language. I have written some articles about denouncements against a system that is harming the ways of life of the campesinos here in this region, and also supporting the process of struggle of indigenous communities. And part of what we do has to do with the project that we have called Indigenous Resistance, and its objective is to have a collective construction of our constructive of food systems. And the food systems that we know is called Milpa, or the Three Sisters Garden. And this is a space where we work collectively in order to produce these foods that are sacred, and also seeds that help us to connect to the land. And it's also a way to remember and to reconnect with our ancestors. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Heber. Really glad that you're here and excited to learn more about your work in this conversation. So the first question I'd like to get into with all of you, in your introductions, you all shared a commonality in that you are working in your communities for your people, for the defense of Indigenous lifeways, defense of Indigenous lands, and as you mentioned, even Heber, like being a part of what we know as the resistance or the Indigenous movement, and really, a movement that involves a lot of action and sometimes involves risk. It involves pushing against colonial systems to reclaim what we once had, what is rightfully ours. So, and obviously involved in that work, as I mentioned, there being risk, like you obviously have to have a lot of passion that you draw upon to be able to enter into that work. Not everybody chooses that work. As I shared earlier, some people can get very comfortable with colonial systems because it's all that we've known growing up within colonized countries and colonized lands. And it's hard to push back. It's hard to push against the norms and the status quo. So to get us started, I would love to just hear from each of you what really called you in to do that work. What was sort of the impetus or the beginning? What was like that turning point for you that really made you enter into this work in a more concerted and devoted way? And so we'll start with Edith, if you can just share that much with us for now, like what called you to do this work and why is it so important to you?
Bien, creo que de mi lado.
Well, I think from me, there were 2 points. One that has to do with our family history that's tied to the territories, and we had to leave it at I had to leave at a very young age in order to study. But I think those that had a lot of influence on me were my ancestors. I have this cultural inheritance of a grandfather who was a wise man, and they communicate with the rain. They ask for the rain to come, and they also use the fire to call upon these elements. So since I was a very little girl, I would listen to him. As a little girl, we knew what it meant to make these offerings and to participate in these rituals. That was one thing. All these stories that I heard from my grandparents that were always very tied to our territory before it was recognized as an agrarian land. They had a lot of passion and a lot of dignity of who we are that live on this territory and this land, and this work that we did as campesinos. And the other is, it's not very pleasant to share, but I think it's important. But it's what's called now racism. I remember when they would come to the municipality, I didn't understand why people would look at us differently when we would go to the municipality. Why was there a certain kind of, like a disrespect, like listening to our language, like we were like some odd people. And I think that was combined with what was happening, like feeling that contempt from them. Like then I started to understand what my grandparents that are no longer here for more than a decade, but they would tell me, we never have to have fear. We never have to look away. No, we always have to have our head up high because we work on the land. We live in the community. We don't do harm to anyone. We don't have to ask for permission. We don't have to be ashamed of who we are and where we come from. If you're going to study, you're going to go and you're going to come back because we need people here to defend our community, our people. So I think that's part about what continues to motivate me. I don't feel it as a burden. I feel it as a commitment that day by day, every day, it's what moves me. It's my vision. And this is how I relate to the world and how I want to live here on this world and how I've constructed my life and how to give this impetus to my life. And this is a commitment that we each make, and we're each free to make these decisions. But this is something that moves me because I feel that really helps me wake up every day. That would be it. Thank you.
Thank you, Edith. That was so beautiful and moving, and I can personally relate a lot to just the experience of racism, although it is a negative thing, also being a little bit of that motivation and that motivator to really call us to ground ourselves in our purpose and our right to be here, our right to exist as ourselves, as Indigenous people, to not have to ask for permission, that these are our lands, this is who we are, and we don't need to be ashamed. And colonialism really wants us to be. That colonialism has done everything it could to make us shrink. And so it really feels like the time of our people pushing back against that. So thank you so much for sharing that. We'll go next to Andre, and same question for you. You know, what has been the thing that really called you into this work? I know that Hawaii is incredibly impacted by colonialism in a very acute and unique way, as like this paradise, this tropical, beautiful place that everybody in the world wants to be at. And so the way in which your people have had to, deal with and resist that colonialism has just been really empowering to watch in the last decade or so. But I know that it is a unique type of resistance. And so what was it for you that called you to this work?
Well, a bunch of things. Starting with, learning about our political history, which for many years was hidden from Hawaiian people, or tucked away and forgotten over time. But the most important thing is that, to learn that we existed as an independent sovereign nation with full recognition and equal status to any of the European countries out there, whether it be the United States, France, Germany, England, Switzerland, whatever. We had achieved recognition as an independent nation state. And then, of course, in 1893, the United States breaks a treaty of trust and, invades our country and overthrows our government and our queen. And from there, it's a subsequent history of land dispossession, extraction, exploitation. And, a big part has been the romanticization of Hawaii as this tropical sort of tourist resort kind of environment. We're a vacation destination for many people. And so we've been bombarded by colonialism from the 1800s in the form of, the United States wanting Hawaii for their military strategic location in the center of the Pacific with Pearl Harbor, and then moving forward with, land dispossession, the sugarcane industry as a huge, large-scale monocropping industry, caused a lot of water diversions in Hawaii on every island to support this, sort of colonial sugarcane industry. So learning these things really helped put the pieces together on the social impacts and conditions of my people. And, I was raised, kind of born and raised into it. My parents were struggling, whether it be farming rights or access rights around land and water. I was kind of immersed in resistance and struggle. Although as a young person, I was more interested in surfing, and being at the beach. And in my formative years, I used to think that I'm not a political guy. I'm a cultural guy. I engage in cultural practice, whether it be ceremony to our gods, rituals, wood carving, things like that, stone carving. I thought that I was content with cultural practice and sort of being tucked away in a corner there. But I learned very quickly as a young adult that you can run, but you can't hide from the incursions of colonialism and how it impacts all of our lives here in Hawaii. So, as a cultural practitioner, starting out, engaging in ceremony and making of implements and chants and prayers, it was just a matter of time, really, for any cultural practitioner in Hawaii that, you're gonna be infringed upon, whether it be denial of access to the ocean or the mountains and the resources that you need, or whether it be on the development and destruction that comes with development of, gathering, places where we gather cultural material, plants for ceremony or food. I learned quickly, it's a matter of time that, you will intersect with a political situation. And oftentimes it's in the form of gentrification and development, So for a short time in my 20s, I tried to situate myself as a cultural guy and not a political guy. But now I'm a cultural political guy because I don't have a choice. So, I through years of just, being impacted by tourism, by development, by impacts to our natural water systems. It was just a natural logical progression rather, to get into the fight. It's like, you fight for your rights to access, land and water and cultural resources, or you get stepped on. And so probably the big one for me was time on Kaho'olawe Island, which was a military bombing target. It's an entire island here in Hawaii. It's one of our major islands, although it's one of the smaller ones. And the United States military was bombing that island as a target range. And it's a sacred spiritual island. So, as a young teenager, I remember the struggle to stop the bombing and being aware of it, but not being involved in it. And then later, as a young adult in my mid-20s, I was able to work there and cross paths with the mentors and elders who fought that struggle. The elders who became my mentors, who were engaged in that resistance, and 2 lives were lost in that struggle. But it was really a formative developmental time for me, where I had deeper context of spirituality and ceremony tied to political resistance and struggle to really defend land and water resources in Hawaii. Because we come from an island ecosystem, we have finite resources, but tourism doesn't care about that. People want their instant gratification with their vacations. They want their tropical island experience. And so for us, it's really a constant battle of, dealing with the tourism and the impacts and the development. So, during my younger years, I worked on this island where we were restoring the island as a former Navy bombing range and doing unexploded ordnance clearing and land restoration, repopulating the island with native plants and stuff. And so it was during those times that I gained a strong consciousness around environmental protection, sacred site protection. And I grew up on a farm. So, we had a pig farm on Kauai. And so, I understand the importance of food security and food production and that self-reliance that comes with that. So, all of these things combined really just shaped me as a young person. And as time went by, I went to college, to graduate school, and learned more about the political history of Hawaii and sort of the betrayal that the U.S. committed upon us, because we had a treaty of a protectorate relationship between the Kingdom of Hawaii and the U.S. And as you learn about the colonialism, the overthrow of our government, the land occupation, land dispossession, the health impacts to our people, you can't help but get angry, And as in my younger years, a lot of anger and frustration at learning this history, and then learning how to channel that anger and frustration through organizing, uplifting the community and taking on issues, whether to protect our land and water. So it just kind of evolved as if you're conscious enough to care about your culture, you will be dragged into the political spectrum.
Yeah. Thank you, Andre. Really, really good and strong points there that I also connect with. I know that a lot of Native people don't necessarily consider themselves as activists. They're like, I don't like that label maybe, but just by virtue of us loving our culture and our land and our way of life, we get called in and pulled in to do the work called sometimes activism. And actually, in fact, one of my first experiences in so-called activism was also protesting a bombing range that was north of my reservation. We're in a very isolated place, and there's an Air Force base 90 miles north of our reservation, and they had a practice bombing range where they were dropping practice bombs. The Air Force was, and it was on our sacred lands as well. And so my first experience as a 10-year-old was holding up a picket sign protesting the bombing range. And I think it took years for me personally to really kind of struggle with, like, am I an activist, as I started doing more, showing up in more of those spaces. And I still kind of struggle with it sometimes. Like, am I an activist, or am I an Indigenous person doing what I'm supposed to do? But I go back and forth. Sometimes I'm like, I embrace that, that label or title, but more than anything, first and foremost, I'm an Indigenous person, and I have that responsibility. So anyway, so much of what you shared, I know it resonates with a lot of people. So thank you for sharing that. We'll go next to Heber. If you can now share with us sort of your own personal journey or impetus, or what called you into doing the work of defending the rights and culture of the Maya people.
Han sido varios
Of
momentos
course,
en mi
so
vida
it
donde
has
he
been
ido
about several moments in
reflexionando,
my
he ido
life where I've had the
entendiendo
opportunity
mejor.
to reflect and better
En el
understand
94, cuando
what
fue
is happening. So in
el movimiento
1994, when we
zapatista
had
en
the
nuestro país,
Zapatista
un
movement in our
movimiento
country, in Mexico, this is a
que
very
causó,
strong movement that caused,
provocó más bien la mirada, ¿no? del mundo hacia los
it
pueblos
caused
indígenas, y en especial al pueblo
to shed some
Chiapas,
light
el
in
pueblo indígena
indigenous
en
peoples,
Chiapas, ¿no?
especially in the state of
Y este
Chiapas.
movimiento
And so
inicialmente
this
armado,
movement that
para
initially
mí
was
fue
a
como
armed
pues muy
movement,
sorprendente, ¿no? Me
I
llamaba
was
mucho
in
la
shock. I was
atención
very surprised,
lo
and
que
I was very
ocurría, ¿no?
attracted to it,
En mi
and I
familia,
wanted to
cuando se
know what
hablaba como pues ya
happened.
inició
So
la guerra, ¿no?
my
Era así
family
como tener
used to
miedo,
say
tener
that
miedo de que pues se vienen
the
muertes, se viene
war
dolor, ¿no?
started, that we
Y
had
sobre todo en ese
pain
momento
and
pues también
hurting,
atravesábamos
and so
pues una situación también muy
we
compleja a nivel
were
familiar,
also
¿no?
going through a very
Entonces,
difficult
para mí fue
situation
como
family-wise.
muy fuerte.
So
Me
for me, it
permitió
was
también
very strong,
ese hecho
and
puntual,
I was very
conectar, ¿no? con la
surprised.
historia, conectar con la memoria para poder entender como lo que estaba ocurriendo, ¿no?
And I
Entonces,
needed
para mí,
that
el
to
poder
understand what was happening.
escuchar libre determinación, el poder escuchar
So
autonomía, el
to
poder
be able to
escuchar
understand
libertad, el poder escuchar
autonomy,
nuevamente tierras,
freedom,
semillas, ¿no? Era
self-determination,
como pensar,
seeds,
pues eso es
and all those
lo que nosotros
terms that came back to
a
me, and
nivel
I
como de
started
mi pueblo, de
thinking
mi familia, donde yo vivía
that
en ese momento, decir, pues eso yo lo tengo, ¿no? Entonces,
I used to
entender que
say
en otras
that's
partes
something I have. So I needed to
de
understand
nuestro
that
país ni siquiera se
someone in my
tenía esas
country,
condiciones mínimas de vida, mínimas dignas de vivir, ¿no? Entonces fue para mí
we
como
didn't
muy
have
fuerte,
the
¿no? Entonces,
minimum conditions to live.
eso me
So
ayudó en términos de provocar una
that
revisión
helped
en mi
me
memoria
to
histórica
go
con mis
through
abuelos, ¿no?
my
Con mi familia, con los
history with
amigos, con las
my elders,
organizaciones,
my
con los conocidos,
grandparents,
para
and my
ubicarme en ese
family, so
momento, ¿no?
that
En
I
esa
was able to
coyuntura.
know where I
Y
was at
una
that moment.
de las razones
And
que
so one
me
of the
sirvieron mucho
reasons
para entender
that helped me
fue en
understand all
gran
that
parte mi abuelo, ¿no? O
was
sea, mi
my
abuelo en
grandfather,
ese momento
because
siempre
my
un
grandfather
hombre
at that
optimista, un
time
hombre
was
como
always
muy
very
claro.
positive, very clear.
Y bueno, pues para mí fue como importante,
As I was saying,
¿no?
it was important to
que una de las luchas
figure out that
importantes que se
one of
tenían
the
que estar
important
luchando
struggles that we
tenía que
had to
ser en lo
participate in,
cotidiano, tenía
it
que
really
ser
had to be a daily struggle.
con cuidar lo
We had to
esencial,
be
que es lo que
careful
nos
to
hace
care
ser
for the
pueblos,
essential
¿no?
that
Que es
that which
las
makes us a
semillas, ¿no?
people, and
Que a
that's the
través de las
seeds.
semillas es
Because
donde
through the
para mí
seeds
fue
is
también
where, for me,
encontrar y conectar con mi
I
espiritualidad, ¿no?
was
Con mi
able to
identidad.
connect with my identity, my
Y
spirituality.
decimos siempre, ¿no?
And
Que
we
cada grano
always say
pues
that each
representa
screen represents the face of a grandparent, a grandmother, grandfather that teaches us and shares their wisdom with us. And so for me, the motivation, the biggest motivation for me is that very thing, to be able to recognize myself in the seeds, to continue to work on this, to work in the organization, to work in the collective, in the community, that I think is my priority, and also to confirm this, that this is a space where we can continue to construct these really small autonomy that has to do with our food sovereignty. And then as a seed collective, we named that as like the small seed producers, because they are small. Actually, the seeds themselves are ways that life starts and the way that we decide to live. And this is the most, the deepest, the profoundest part of our being. And for me too, because I have been in different spaces, like in media, where I had to go denounce the extractive industry that is affecting our Mayan people's land and territory, where tourism is also displacing our communities from their lands in order to take over sacred sites and sacred land. Things that take place in our community life, we see that also it's difficult to construct something from our pain and to resist. But if we think about other ways to do a struggle, that also has to do with connects us, that what gives us a lot of joy, and it also gives us dignity. And this has to do with our small systems of life, which are the milpas, or the Three Sisters Gardens.
You, Heber, for sharing all of that. Also, you know, just as with the other Changemaker fellows who shared, just deeply connect with and resonate with everything that you shared. And makes me think of this next question that I also wanted to ask all of you. We talked, I think each of you already kind of shared some of the challenges of being an Indigenous person in your homelands, being impacted by racism and colonialism and tourism as some of the challenges in your work. And you were all in different ways, you know, community, just an asset to your community for defending. Some people may call activists. So the theme of this panel is defend. And at Indian Collective, our tagline is defend, develop, decolonize, because we believe that we have to do all of those things and not just one. We can't just do it. There's not just one way to achieve self-determination for our people. There has to be this dynamic approach, this multi-pronged approach. And the tagline defend, develop, decolonize is one way that we try to summarize that multi-pronged approach, that we have to, you know, be defending our rights, and that's like the resistance, that's sometimes known as like being on the front lines. Then in the meantime, we have to be at the same time developing solutions. We can't just be fighting all day. We got to, because we're tearing something down, because it has to, you know, these colonial systems have to be taken down if we want to, or not taken down, but like just really reimagined if we want to achieve the collective well-being that our communities once had. And then we have to build something back up too. We have to have something there for our people to shift into. So there's the develop part, and then what did I say? Defend, develop, and then decolonize is embedded throughout. So all of the work that you all have named so far is obviously like decolonial work, and the decolonial thread is really through everything. But if I could just now shift to talking about some of those challenges in defending your your way of life, your people, your culture. Although we've spoken to that, and it's not to ask, to focus on the negatives, but to be really realistic and honest and say that those challenges exist. But not only do they exist, we also have this ancestral and innate perseverance and intelligence and grit to face those challenges and navigate them and still come up with a solution. And that's what we really embrace here at Indian Collective, is this, addressing the challenges with creativity. And that's what we want our people to really, as a collective, really see and embody and have confidence in their ability to address the challenges creatively. And so this question is more or less to just share realistically with our people, yes, the challenges are there, and here are ways that we can creatively navigate them. And so we're going to mix up our flow here a little bit, and we're going to go to Andre for this one first. So Andre, what are some more of the challenges, and how have you navigated them and still found creative ways to continue the work even despite the challenges?
Sure. Really good question. I'll start, internally, for myself and my family, there's challenges because activism, and I embrace the word, I have no problem with that. I know I'm Kanaka, I know who I am. Activism is what I do. And it's grounded in the word active, action, to be active. I'm not idle or, not engaged. So activism for me is not a problem, but activism is not a productive way to make a living. Activism doesn't provide a house or feed my family. So those are some of the immediate challenges, right? That all of us who engage in resisting, colonial incursion in its many shapes and forms, it's a struggle that we all experience. How do we make a living so that we can thrive as individuals and with our families? So housing, food, my ability to pay my bills is the first struggle. My family, my nuclear family. And so one of the ways that we've kind of responded to that struggle, where, it's a lot of sacrifice, but we've moved onto our farm. So we have a farm that we lease, and it's fairly inexpensive, but it's a responsibility of land stewardship and, to care for the land. But we decided to live on the farm because, one, it puts us here on the ground, every day. So we're working more productive. And of course, we've alleviated the high cost of rent that's associated here with Hawaii. But some of the challenges and trade-offs with that is, we live like in a camp environment, so I have an outside shower, that I built out of plywood, basically. We don't have flushing toilets. We use rental porta potties. And I have an outside kitchen where we cook under a tent. But that's how we balance out, the quality of life that we can get to take us out of the rental market and living on the land. And we like it, we embrace that. So that's one of the kind of personal challenges and how we've responded to that. But other challenges in the movement, some of the biggest challenges, I think, is, as an organizer, I can see that organizing is a weak link. Organizing skills is a weak link in many movements and struggles. People, in order to do the work, you need to know how to organize. Or in order to do the work efficiently and effectively, it's important to know how to organize and to operate by organizing principles. So that's a challenge. So one of the ways I'm addressing that is we're developing an organizing curriculum for Hawaiians that's going to geared towards our values and our language and things that resonate with us. But I feel like that's an important component in the community work, is organizing skills. And there's not too many organizing training opportunities out there. Of course, organizing is mostly tied to the unions, different unions, and they train their people. But the general community normally doesn't have access to organizing training opportunities. So we're trying to address that here in Hawaii. And of course, we can mobilize people. It's easy to mobilize people. And it's important to know the difference between mobilizing and organizing, where organizing is protracted, for the long term, long haul, we're building power. And mobilizing is, short-term gatherings like marches and stuff. So really trying to educate our community that it's good to mobilize. It's easy to mobilize. Just hire a band and provide some food and people will come, right? But how do we keep people engaged in the struggle, resistance for social justice, for environmental justice, for the indigenous people of Hawaii and everywhere? So developing leadership as an organizer, I know that one of the number one principles of organizing is to always develop new leadership so that as your work grows, you have leadership that can help carry the workload, do the heavy lifting. Some of the challenges, of course, for this kind of political activism work is resources, accessing funding so that you can do the work, so that you can buy. It's difficult sometimes to find funding that will allow you to purchase camera gear or a laptop or, things that you need to really do work. And that's where I believe NDN has really, the creation of NDN and the work that NDN does has really filled a big void in that arena by providing support for this type of political activism, the decolonial defending and resistance and struggle to protect our way of life, to protect our land and water, our cultural and natural resources. It's hard to find support for that kind of work. But I think that one of the things that I see is NDN, by incorporating defend into their primary principles and supporting that kind of work, it's kind of cracked open the door wider and wider where some of the other mainstream philanthropic orgs start to see, maybe we should get involved in supporting this kind of work as well. So really kind of paving the way and opening doors for us has been a huge benefit from the work of the relationship with NDN. And another challenge, I'll just say one more and leave it at that. But it's really combating, the rhetoric and the demagoguery and the fear that is spread out through, venues like social media, mainstream media, that our people, I notice a lot of my people are susceptible to the rhetoric, the propaganda and demagoguery of the ultra right wing, of the racist sector of the United States. And so much people fall prey to demagoguery and just fear-based propaganda. So it's a challenge to really sort of negate and counteract that type of misinformation that we see. Mahalo.
Yeah, thank you, Andre. Relate to everything you said. And I feel like such a student of what you just shared too. And I'm really learning a lot from what you're sharing, and really glad that you were also able to speak a little bit to how NDN in our work to support like frontline actions is really unique and needed. And our people are so disenfranchised that, and there's this massive wealth gap, as we know, that we know when it comes time to do the work of resistance, to have resources really allows you to have a stronger and more dynamic presence. And so if colonial forces have all the resources and that's who we're up against, then we need to be just as well resourced with technology, with just dynamic tools at our fingertips to be able to fight and push back. And I know there's all sorts of, even critiques of having resources as a movement, but it matters. It totally matters. And it made me think of something else too that I want to plug just for a moment, just for folks watching, folks who are involved in frontline action or community organizing, that NDN, while we support, change makers like Andre and Edith and Heber, we also have a community action grant or a community action fund that is available for anyone to apply for right now. It is currently open. You can check out our website at indiancollective.org. Underneath our section on grants, check out the Community Action Fund. And so if you find yourself having to organize and rally your people together to take a stand against something happening in a community and you need the resources for that, that funding is available to you. Because we know what we're up against, we know who we're up against, and there is an abundance of resources out there, and a lot of those resources were made off of the theft of our land, the theft of our resources, the exploitation of Black slave labor. The resources that the wealthy, majority or the wealthy elites have, those are resources that were extracted from our people. And so getting this funding to our people, there's a philosophy behind it. There's a reason behind it. And so I'm so happy, Andre, that you touched on that and all of the other challenges too, as like not a reason to stop, but a way to get creative and keep moving. We'll go next to Edith, if you can also share some of the challenges that you've also encountered in this work that you're doing in your home community. And as we know, like across Indigenous communities, a lot of our challenges are similar, but based on our regions, based on how our communities are slightly different, there might be also some different challenges that we navigate as Indigenous communities. So what have been some of the challenges that you've faced in doing your organizing and activism work, in your work of defending, and how have you navigated those challenges?
Bien. Creo que sí me gustaría contextualizar un poco.
First I'd like to give you some context, because from there we can reflect, or at least I have reflected on it recently. So historically, we know that we have heard this narrative about development in our peoples, in communities, and progress and colonization, and now they talk about development or transformation even in Mexico. The fourth transformation, as the new administration says. So from there, it would be important to have more clarity and understanding that these narratives that are still being imposed in our communities are creating displacement of local knowledge and on how we're thinking about our own nourishment, how we're thinking about our healing, how do we learn from each other and teach each other from this memory and this history, and then communicating it through our native language, which are not the language we are speaking right now, the colonialized languages, English and Spanish. But it is important to notice that through this knowledge displacement, we encounter a first challenge. When they talk about development, that's how they reach our ancestral territories. If we think about extractivism, in 2010 and up until now, we had a very strong operation carried out by mining companies, especially Canadian mining companies, that are targeting our mountains here in Guerrero. And it was interesting to see the promise they made, the promise of development and building schools, building hospitals, creating jobs. But what I want to reflect on with that is the logic in which they say it. So before, they talked about extractivism projects, capital, but now the new logic is that these new extractivistic projects and how they are imposing their ways in our communities has to do with the state policies when it comes to Mexico.
Pues bajo este
currently
discurso
in
del
Mexico,
desarrollo, del
with
bienestar,
this
entre comillas,
discourse of
que se pretenden
development, well-being,
instalar como
progress,
muchos
they
proyectos, ¿no?
want
De
to
carreteras, de
start
parques
building many
eólicos y
projects
demás.
for wind
Y aquí en el
farms
caso
or
particular de la
roads
montaña,
and
vemos
highways.
como esta
And here in
constante
the
iniciativa
mountains, we
de un
always
modo
see this
desmantelar cierta
initiative
autonomía
of
que hay en las comunidades, ¿no?
dismantling the sovereignty of
Anteriormente había
communities.
como toda esta noción
So
del cuidado
before,
del bosque,
there was
de
this
la siembra
notion
de la
of
milpa, el
protecting
sistema que se
the
utiliza en las
forest,
montañas y en
the Three
Mazapolos,
Sisters Garden,
y lo que ahora
harvesting.
vemos con este tipo de
But
programas
now with
es
these new programs, what we're
asistenciales que de un
seeing
modo pues están quitando esa autonomía, esa
is
capacidad de los pueblos de
providing
organizarse a través
assistance.
de
So they are
asambleas
taking
comunitarias
away the
y
autonomy
generando
of
núcleos que
peoples
están dividiendo
and
a las
communities to
comunidades.
get
Ahora
organized,
se
and they
está
are
mirando de un
dividing
modo como
those
el territorio
communities. So
subdividido en
they are
pequeños núcleos que se
subdividing the
están siendo
territory
financiados por el
in
propio Estado y que nosotros
that are
vemos
being
como un
financed by
riesgo
the
porque
state.
siguen
So that it is
atacando
a
esa
huge
autonomía,
risk
esa
because
libre
they keep
determinación que tenemos en
chipping
los
into
pueblos
our
de cómo
autonomy
queremos
and
habitar esos territorios.
self-determination on
No
how we
solo
want
es
to
que no hay
work and
un
live in that land.
reconocimiento de
So it's
nuestros
not
derechos
only
históricos,
acknowledging our historical
de
rights
nuestra historia
and
estos
our
territorios
history and our culture
muchísimos años antes de que
thousands of
llegaran los
years
españoles,
before the
sino que
Spaniards
ahora
came in.
con el
But
discurso del
now,
desarrollo y esa
with
narrativa
the
del
speech of
desarrollo, se
development
pretenden
and
imponer
progress, they
estos
want to
nuevos proyectos que
impose
es un nuevo modo de
their new
saqueo.
projects.
A lo
So
mejor no es
it's a
tan
new
agresivo como
way
la
of
minería que no
stealing and
logró
extracting.
instalarse
So
por la
perhaps it's
organización
not as
comunitaria de los
aggressive
pueblos
as
campesinos, indígenas,
minings,
pero
but
actualmente hay otras lógicas
they
que
are
están
using
desplazando
other
a las
ways to
comunidades y eso
displace
tiene que ver
communities
con
and take
todo
over
el
our
tiempo
lands.
estar
And so
diciendo
it has to
no
do
sirve ser
with
campesino, no sirve
repeating
ser
the same
indígena, no sirve
statement,
hablar
which
tu
is
idioma,
that
no
it's
sirve
useless
portar
to
tu
be a
huipil,
farmer,
no
useless to
sirve
be
hacer
indigenous,
la
useless to
ritualidad.
speak your
Es mejor
language,
comprar
useless to do
maíz
your
y no sembrar
ceremonies.
porque
So
es
just
más
purchase your
caro
corn and don't
hacer todo el
harvest it
sistema
because
de la
it
siembra,
takes longer,
compres
it's more
el
expensive.
maíz que
So
no
just
sabemos
buy
de dónde
it.
lo están
And we
trayendo.
don't even
Bueno,
know
sí
where that
sabemos que se
corn is
importa
coming from. Well, we do
de
know
otros
it's being
países,
imported from other
pero
countries.
a mí, o sea, ese es un desafío que
But
estamos viendo como
that is a
constante,
challenge
¿no?
that we're
Es decir,
constantly
actualmente
seeing
aquí en la montaña,
nowadays.
la
So
pelea ya no
right
es
now
contra un
in
monstruo
the mountains,
extractivo como la
we're not
minería, porque
fighting
hasta ahorita
against
está parado,
an
sino es
extractivistic monster
directamente
like
con la
mining,
gente en
but
las
it's
comunidades
directly
que se
with
está
the
dejando
people in
llevar
the
por este
communities
discurso
who
del
are being
desarrollo o
swept
por
away
estos
by these
programas que son
programs and
asistencialistas, que
the
están,
development
siguen
speech.
otra
So
vez
they
imponiendo una
are
lógica
they
que no
keep
corresponde
imposing
al
a
de la autonomía
logic
ni
that
de la
is not
libre
ours. It's
determinación.
not
Están desconectando a la
self-determination.
gente de esos
They are
saberes campesinos.
disconnecting
Es
the
como
people
si
from their
los
knowledge,
alimentos se están
and it's
basando
as
en una
if
dieta impuesta
they
por lo
are
que es comer
they
sano.
having an
Cuando en la
imposed
comunidad
diet
nosotros
of someone
tenemos,
telling them
aparte
this
de
is
la milpa,
healthy. But
nuestros
in our
métodos de
community, we
recolección
have
de alimentos en las
other
montañas,
harvesting
las
ways
temporadas
beside the
de
Three
lluvia
Sisters
que se
Garden.
recolectan
So we know
desde
that during
hongos,
the rain seasons,
quelite,
we can
insectos,
collect
plantas
insects,
medicinales,
mushrooms,
pero que actualmente mucha
medicinal
gente lo
herbs.
ha estado
But now
dejando de
people
hacer.
are
Entonces,
leaving that
ese es como un
aside
primer
and they are
elemento que
buying the
vemos de
speech of
riesgo y
development. So
que vemos que es un
that's a
desafío
very
trabajar en
important
medio
challenge
de ese
and a risk.
contexto, ¿no?
It's
Lo
very
otro,
challenging to work in that context.
que vemos tiene que ver con
Another
la
challenge that
violencia.
we see is
Justo
violence.
se
So
habla mucho del estado de Guerrero y
the state
por
of Guerrero
Acapulco
is
se llega a
always on
conocer,
the news,
pero en
especially
realidad
you probably
todo
know
el
Guerrero
territorio
because of
nacional la
Acapulco,
violencia pues
but
está
in the
disparada.
whole state, violence
Actualmente pues
keeps
esta disputa
rising. Right
precisamente por
now,
el control de estos territorios, no
there's
solo
being
por
a
estas empresas
dispute
extractivas, sino
to
también
control the
por las
state, not
rutas
only
de
by the mining
trasiego
or
de
extractivistic
droga, pero
companies, but
también
also because of
por el
drug
control
trafficking
de
and
paso
who has
de muchas
control
personas que cruzan
of the
ciertas fronteras
passageway
o
for
personas
people. So for immigrants who are going
que
through, they are
se
fighting
involucran
for the
en otro
control
tipo
of that. And
de
so
redes, ¿no?
there
De
are many
tráfico. Entonces,
traffic
ese es
networks
otro,
going on and
otra variable
smuggling.
que
So
actualmente
that's
pues
another
estamos
factor
latentes.
that
Lamentablemente
creates
uno se
challenges.
acostumbra a vivir en
And
medio de la violencia,
unfortunately,
lo
one
naturaliza, lo
gets used
normaliza,
to
pero no
living in
tendría que
a
ser así.
context of
No
violence
tendríamos
and
que
you
vivir
normalize
todo
it,
el
but it
tiempo
shouldn't be this way. We shouldn't have to live.
más sana
She's back.
de convivencia. Es otra de las rupturas que que hemos visto.
So this is another
Pero
challenge
yo
that we
creo
have
que
seen.
el último elemento
And
pues, que
finally,
tiene que ver con
another factor,
pues una embestida fuerte de este modelo extractivista neoliberal,
which
tiene
has
que
to
ver
do
con los
with this
desplazamientos forzados. La
rampage of
migración
mining
histórica que tienen las comunidades
companies
indígenas,
is
mucha gente de los
forced
pueblos, a
displacement.
veces
So
se
many
dice, se van por
times
empleo, se van por
they say that
se van
people leave
a
to
cruzar
find
la
a better
frontera a Estados
job and they
Unidos, o se
want to
van a los
cross the
campos
border to the
jornaleros de las
US
agroindustrias en el
and
norte
they
del
work
país.
with the
Cuando en
agro
realidad,
industries in the
lo que
northern
se
part of
tendría que estar
the
diciendo es que es un
country, but in
desplazamiento
fact,
forzado.
they
La
are
gente en
being
los pueblos,
forced
pues
to
entre
move
la
away
violencia
from
que
their
vive ya no
homes
puede
because of
vivir ahí,
violence,
entre las
which
precariedades
makes
que
it
también han sido
impossible to
impuestas
live.
por todas estas lógicas que
And
estamos
then
aquí
because of all
compartiendo,
the
pues también la gente
shortages,
empieza a irse, ¿no?
people
Pensando y
decide to
aspirando a
move
un modelo de
away
vida que
and
no
they
es el
are
propio, pero
expecting
que
another
piensan que
lifestyle
a
that is
partir
not
de ahí
their own,
resuelven como muchas
but they think that that's how
situaciones
they will
locales.
solve many of the
Entonces,
local
sí son
situations.
como
So
varias
there are several
problemáticas que se
factors,
están
several
viviendo como
challenges
desafío
that
y que nosotros decimos, bueno, ¿cómo
have
podemos
become
ser
problems.
creativos? ¿Cómo
And so
podemos
we ask
como
ourselves,
darle
how
la
can we
vuelta
be
a todas estas
creative? How
narrativas
can
que se
we
tienen tanto de los
overcome
pueblos,
these
pero también las
narratives
narrativas de lo
from
que es
the
ese
communities, but
desarrollo,
also
lo que
what it
ellos
means
piensan
to
que es
be
bienestar, ¿no?
developed
Pues
and
algo que a
development and
nosotros
well-being?
de un modo
So
nos funciona es cómo
something that has
colocamos,
worked for us
pues
is
a partir de la reconexión con la historia, la
as we
memoria,
reconnect
estas historias
with
más
our
de
memories
esperanza,
and
estas historias
history,
para
we
reconstruir
start
la
to
vida,
give more
cómo
hope
recuperamos esa
to
autonomía,
rebuild
cómo
life, to
reconstruimos la
regain
libre
our
determinación.
autonomy,
Y
to
para
build
empezar, no
self-determination.
solamente se necesita una
And
lucha
to start,
política, porque
we
ha sido
do
algo de
not
lo que
only need
hemos
to fight a
aprendido,
political
sino
fight,
tenemos que volver a lo
but
básico.
we
Y
need
lo
to go
básico
back to
es el
basics,
alimento y lo básico
and
es
that is
la salud.
food and
Entonces,
health.
a partir de ahí es
So we
otra
need
vez
to start
empezar
from
de lo
there
pequeño y de
and
lo pequeño,
start
porque después,
small,
al
and
generar
slowly
luego
but
procesos muy
surely
amplios
we can do
de
it. Because if you
carácter
start
tan
big
político,
with
se
huge
pierde el corazón
projects
de
that
la
are very
lucha.
political,
Eso
you
es
will
algo
lose the
que por aquí
spirit of
hemos
the fight.
aprendido.
And that's
Sería
something we
eso
have
de mi
learned
parte.
here. That would be all from my part. Thank you.
Edith, that was so beautiful. Thank you. Just the back to basics is so meaningful, and the even the simplest things I've heard, like the simplest ways of our ancestral knowledge, they were cultivated over generations, over thousands of years, and so even though they seem very simple, they're also very 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 brilliant. They represent the brilliance of our people, and going back to those basics, just as I imagine just the simple things of like food, language, the land, community, reminds me of a phrase that a spiritual teacher and relative of ours says, just keep things simple, pure, and sacred. Just keep them simple, and you'll get so many blessings that way. When we think of treating our ailments or illnesses, they say if you go back to the traditional foods, a lot of the traditional foods here in certain ceremonies are meat, corn, and berries and water. Those are all in the ceremonies. They say if you go back to those simple foods, it will nourish your spirit, your body. It seems very simple, but it's also very, very powerful. And I just also want to acknowledge and appreciate and give gratitude for what you shared about the unique challenges there in Mexico. And it's a good reminder of just the ways that even despite all of those really like some really very, very challenging things like violence, that there is a respite or a encouragement that comes from just still reconnecting to the really, really simple and beautiful parts of our culture and our way of life. I think it's also really important to lift up the fact that colonialism, as you mentioned, has changed and evolved. It doesn't look the same way it might have 100 years ago for our ancestors. There's a new wave of colonialism that is a little more tricky. It's so sinister, the way that colonialism and these narratives try to colonize our spirits, colonize the spirits of our people, to make us believe that these more convenient ways are better and they're superior. And so that assimilation is happening still. Colonialism is happening still in these narratives, and definitely something that I think happens across Indigenous communities around the world is this enticing narrative of convenience and of Western superiority. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, and most importantly, like how you found strength and encouragement in just the beautiful simple things. That was so powerful. Okay, we will go next to Heber, and also for you and in your region, I'm sure you know much of what Andre and Edith have shared might be similar for you as well, but also we know that there are unique differences as well in each of our communities. And so you touched on some of the challenges already too, and we know that inherently as Indigenous people who live in countries and places that have been colonized and continue to experience colonialism in new ways, there's always a challenge, and I know that even before colonialism, our people experienced challenges. I've earlier with some of the fellows where we've kind of talked about how even though we know before colonialism our people lived a beautiful way of life, that it was also hard in different ways too. There were always challenges. There were always things that our people had to be creative in terms of figuring out how we still survive and persist as a people. So again, I guess I just say that so that it's really clear that I'm not like trying to be negative by talking about challenges, but to say that this is a part of who we are to have to address them. And so, Heber, if you can share, you know, what some of the unique challenges are that you faced in your work to defend, and how you've navigated those challenges and how your community continues to navigate those challenges today.
Muchas gracias. Creo que es importante siempre partir como de un contexto.
I think it's very important to use, to set it, the context, to really see where we are. And as Edith has said, the simple things are the more powerful things. Struggles come from the very simple things, and these are the ones that endure. And this is what gives us our resistance. Here in the peninsula, this colonial system,
estos rostros, ¿no?, del colonialismo,
we see
ahora,
the
tienen diferentes
colonialism with different names.
Granjas porcícolas,
we
donde están
see
construyendo,
that they have these
megagranjas para criar a 50,000 cerdos, que están
different kind of
las
industry,
aguas,
like
que
for
son aguas de los
pigs,
cenotes,
they're
que son
using the
lugares
water from the
sagrados para nuestro
cenotes.
pueblo
These
maya.
are like these caves where
Estos
that's
otros
sacred
rostros
water.
capitalistas,
And so we see
coloniales,
these faces
también
of
se llaman,
colonialism that
agroindustria, donde están
continue
deforestando
through
en
what's
nuestro
called
territorio
industry
extensas
in our
cantidades de
territories.
selva.
We see
Hablamos
that
que a
they
nivel
take over a
nacional
lot
la
of our
península es una de
rainforests in our
las tres principales
peninsula. In
regiones con mayor
this region
deforestación,
has
tasas de
one of the
deforestación,
greatest amount of deforestation. One of
donde
the
hablamos
three
que,
places where greatest
nuestro
amount of
país
deforestation
es
is
el
taking place.
principal
Our country
importador de
is one of the
maíz
principal
transgénico a nivel
importers of
mundial,
GMO
cosa
corn at the world level.
que hace algunos
And
años,
this
cuando las
is
comunidades,
shown
los
through when
pueblos
a few years
eran,
ago the
los que
communities were
custodiaban
the
las
ones
tierras,
that
las
were in
semillas,
charge of the
el
land
asunto
and the
del
seeds,
maíz se
and the
resolvía
corn
internamente
was something
en
that we
nuestro país, ¿no?
resolved, we dealt with within our
Actualmente,
country and that we produced within our country. But
no
unfortunately,
requerimos de maíz de otras partes del mundo, y principalmente se
now
está
we have to
comprando
use corn from other parts of the world, and we
Unidos,
are
¿no?
buying most of our corn from the United
Curiosamente,
States, almost 100%, unfortunately.
Se ha cuestionado mucho, ¿no?, que
And
el modelo agroindustrial es
this agro-industrial model
justo el proyecto
de desarrollo, el proyecto de
is a
progreso que va
model of
a
development
cambiar,
and
¿no?
progress
Y a
that
resolver el asunto
is
de
going
la
to
alimentación, de las
resolve this
tortillas. Y lo
need
que hemos
for
encontrado pues son
food in our
resultados muy claros,
tortillas,
¿no?
but
De que
we've
este
seen
modelo
that
agroindustrial que
clearly
entró en
that
nuestro
this
país
agro-industrial
desde la
model that is coming
Revolución
to our
Verde en
country from the Green Revolution
1972,
in
lo que ha
1972,
generado ha
what
sido
this has
el
created
mayor uso de
is
agroquímicos, ha
greater
implicado
use
mayor
of
deforestación, ha
pesticides
implicado
and
mucha
deforestation,
contaminación y en
agrochemicals. It's
especial
caused great
lo que está
deforestation,
ocurriendo en las
especially what is
comunidades
taking place in
indígenas
our
mayas de la
indigenous Mayan
península, es que
communities
se
of the
está,
peninsula.
ya se tiene estudios donde se ha
There
encontrado
are studies
presencia
that
de
have
glifosato
shown
en la
the
leche
presence
materna
of
de las
glyphosate
compañeras, de las
in
mujeres que
the
están amamantando a sus bebés, ¿no?
mother's milk
Este es
that
como el
are
resultado,
breastfeeding
¿no?
their
de
children,
este
of our
modelo
sisters are
capitalista
breastfeeding their
que
children.
está
They have this
matando,
chemical.
y
So we see
matando,
that
lo digo literalmente, ¿no?
in their breast
el
milk,
uso
and
de este
they are
tipo
killing us
de
with this
venenos,
type
¿no?
of
al pueblo.
poisons. They're
Pero no
killing our
solamente
people,
eso,
but
sino que
not just
también
that,
están
but
ocurriendo otro tipo de
other things
megaproyectos que tienen que ver, por
are
ejemplo, con el
taking
Tren Maya,
place, like
que es un proyecto
mega projects.
emblemático de
One's
nuestro
called the
gobierno, ¿no? Que
Mayan
lo está
train.
utilizando
This
como
is like a
un
thematic
rostro para poder
topic that our
cambiar, ¿no?
government
la
is using
pobreza y
to
para que
try to
llegue el
change
desarrollo, el
from
bienestar, la vida
poverty so
digna
that
en las
development will
comunidades, ¿no?
arrive to
Pero
our
frente a eso
communities to have a
miramos, ¿no?
dignified
Más
life. But then we
deforestación de la
see that there's
selva,
greater
miramos más gente
deforestation with these mega
desplazada,
projects,
miramos a
more
gente que
people
está
that are
sufriendo,
displaced,
que le están
more
destruyendo sus
people that they
hogares,
are
¿no?
destroying their
Y que
homes.
esos son como
They're,
las maneras y las
and these are the
prácticas que
ways and the
permanecen
practices
desde,
that
desde
remain
hace más de
from
500
more than
años que tenemos
500
la
years
conquista en nuestro país.
that we have
Entonces,
had
digamos
the
que
Spanish conquest here in
esta
our lands.
historia es muy
So
dolorosa
this
y
story
tampoco la
is
podemos
very
ocultar,
painful, and we
tampoco la
can't
podemos
hide it.
dejar de decir,
No, we
porque es
can't,
algo
and we
también
can't
que nos
stop talking
ayuda
about
para
it either,
poder
because this is
entender
something that will
qué
help
es
us
lo
to
que sigue,
understand
¿no?
what is coming,
Entonces, frente a
what we're
esta
facing.
situación que
So
estamos viviendo,
when we're faced with this
muy dura,
situation,
muy fuerte,
this very difficult,
eh,
intense situation,
tuvimos hace
we
unos
had to,
días un
we,
encuentro
a few
de
days ago, we
becarios
had a
aquí de
meeting
nuestro país, aquí en
of
México,
the NDN
en la
fellows here in our
laguna,
country, here in a
que se
laguna,
encuentra
that
aquí al sur
is
del país,
found
en el
here in
estado
the
de
southern
Quintana Roo, una
part
laguna
of
de
the
50
country in
kilómetros de
Quintana
largo,
Roo.
una laguna
It's a
preciosísima, ¿no?
beautiful, beautiful laguna,
Con
and
la
it is,
presencia de seres
it's like a
ancestrales, ¿no? Que
beautiful
según
lagoon.
algunos estudios dicen que son como los abuelos más antiguos, ¿no? Que
And they
están ahí
say
vivos en
that
la
some
laguna,
of the
que
oldest
hoy en día
living
están siendo
ancestors are
también
within
asesinados,
here in the
¿no?
lagoon.
Asesinados por un
But
turismo
unfortunately,
que cada
our
vez
ancestors are
es
being
mayor, y
murdered
pues no
by
solamente eso, sino que
this
hace unos días me
harassment,
enteré
and
y me mandaron una
a
imagen, ¿no?
few
Justo una
days ago we were
imagen
sent
que
an
compartí,
image
¿no? Aquí
that I
en
shared
este
here
espacio,
on this space,
donde se mira, ¿no?
where
La
you can see
deforestación
the
junto a la laguna, ¿no?
deforestation that's
Y
taking
una
place next to the
deforestación
lagoon.
amplia, una
It's a
deforestación donde
huge
está
amount of
representando
deforestation
la
that represents
contaminación, ¿no?
the
de esta
pollution
laguna, de
of
este cuerpo
this
de agua, ¿no? Que
lagoon,
además
of
de
this
ser
body
muy
of water.
precioso,
And this
pues representa también
lagoon
la memoria de nuestro pueblo que está
represents
siendo
the memory
lastimada, ¿no?
of our people that
Entonces,
is really being damaged.
digamos que todo
So we see by all of
esto que
this
es muy
that
grave,
all of this that is
nos
very
hemos como
serious,
planteado también a nivel como de colectivo de semillas,
and
algunas
as
acciones,
a
¿no? Acciones que
seed
tienen que ver
collective, we have really been
con poder
thinking
hacer cosas
about
diferentes
actions
frente a
that we
todo
can
esto que es muy
take
grande y que es muy
that
doloroso, ¿no?
in order to
Y
face
encontramos en
these
nuestras reflexiones
difficult,
que
intense problems
lo
we're having.
fundamental en este
So the
momento
fundamental
es
right at this
mantenernos
moment
con
is
vida.
to
O sea,
really
mantener
keep our
nuestra vida,
alive,
mantener
to
nuestra
keep
relación, mantener
our
nuestra conexión
relationship and
como,
our
pues, como pueblo,
connection
¿no?
as a
Y lo que
people.
encontramos
And
en
what
estas reflexiones
we
es
have
que hay una
determined
palabra muy
is that
bonita en
there is a
maya
really
que le
beautiful
decimos
Mayan word.
chil,
We call
que
it chil,
significa
and it means
el resguardo de la vida, el
the
resguardo de la semilla, ¿no? Eso
protection
tiene que
of
ver con un espacio, ¿no? Un
the
espacio
safekeeping of the seed of
se
life.
construye de
And
manera
this is a
colectiva en un
space
lugar
that
donde se
we
cultivan los alimentos, ¿no?
collect
No
and
solamente se
harvest
cultivan, sino que
food, not
además
that we just
se
cultivate the food,
garantiza
but
una
we
educación allá, ¿no?
also
Se garantiza como una soberanía
guarantee
alimentaria,
food
se garantiza
sovereignty and
también
education
la
about our food, and
participación de
also
la
the
familia, ¿no?
participation of
Porque
the
también
family,
enfrentamos en nuestras
because we
comunidades
also face within our
graves problemas
communities,
con programas de
we
gobierno,
have
donde, por
huge
ejemplo, a los
problems with
jóvenes les están
governmental programs that come into our community,
invitando para
like
participar en
they
algo que le
invite
llaman
the
Jóvenes
youth,
Construyendo el Futuro, un programa
this
que está
program by the
formando
government,
justo a
Youth
jóvenes para
Constructing the
que puedan
Future, and they're inviting young people
salirse
to
de la
go
comunidad, ¿no?
so
Que
that they
puedan
can go to these programs and get
migrar
out
para
of the
otro
community,
tipo
so they can
de
migrate to another
trabajos,
type of work
donde ese tipo de
or
programas
jobs. And these
no
type of
genera
programs really do
raíz
not
para poder
help us to have
quedarse en su
roots within
comunidad.
our
Entonces,
communities
frente
and
a
to
eso, pues el
remain in
colectivo
our
dijo, pues
communities.
tenemos que
So
también hacer
I
cosas con
think
nuestros
we
hijos,
need to
o sea,
do
no
things
hacer
for
cosas
our
con otras
children,
personas, que es muy
not to
difícil
do
porque también hay
things with
una
other
crisis
people that
identitaria muy fuerte, ¿no? Pero
that are
sí hay
makes life more
una
difficult for
posibilidad,
us
una
in our communities.
esperanza,
But we do have
si
hope. We
se
have,
anima, si se
if
construye
we can
algo muy pequeño
construct
que es desde las
something
familias, ¿no? Entonces,
small
el
within the
trabajo del
family.
colectivo
So the work of our collective
se
is to do
se ha enfocado, ¿no? Y creemos, pues,
is to
que
really
desde las
focus,
familias es
and we
posible
believe
construir
that
esas
from
pequeñas
the family focus, we
autonomías,
can
estos
actually
pequeños
have these
jueguitos de vida, ¿no? Que nos puedan
autonomy, and we can
garantizar
have
tener la tierra, que
this
nos puedan garantizar
autonomy
tener
to
nuestra
guarantee
semilla,
our
que nos
land, to
puedan
have our
garantizar
seeds,
tener
that can
sobre todo
also
una vida digna,
guarantee,
¿no? Frente a todo
especially
esto
above
grande, que
all, is a
también
dignified way
pensamos
of
que se tienen
life.
que hacer cosas, pero
We
lo
have to do things when
fundamental en
faced
este
with these
momento, pues,
different
ahora tiene que ver
challenges, but
con el
the
cuidado de
fundamental thing
nuestra
is to
vida, ¿no?
really
Porque
care
es
for
justo
our
lo
life
más
and protect our way of
fuerte que
living,
el gobierno, y
because the
sobre
most
todo el
intense
sistema, el
thing that the
modelo
government is
capitalista, ¿no?
using,
Está
especially this
dañando y está
capitalist model,
lastimando nuestras comunidades.
is really harming our communities with their perspective and their ways of thinking. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Heber, also for touching on some really important aspects of how to navigate the challenges, and you mentioned family there at the end, and really strengthening that family. And I know that here in the United States, the way that that colonizers attempted to really break our connection was to attack the family, was to break apart the family structure. So a part of regaining our strength is really re-strengthening the family, and making sure that we're not underestimating the power of really rebuilding our homes, rebuilding our connection to something like seeds. So I really valued how you shared. Also another like seemingly like simple but really powerful and important solution. All right, so we're rounding out towards the end of our conversation here, and I want to make sure and give you all time to talk about a couple more things before we close out. And that is, just we'll go around one more time, and I'd love to hear how, this past fellowship year has exposed you to some exciting opportunities. Like, we've just been a part of your world for the past year, and we know that you've been doing this work long before us, and you're going to continue to do it. And it's just been such an honor to connect with all of you. I know that the foundation team and the Changemaker program officers have interacted with you throughout the year, and we hope to continue to support your work as well in whatever you're doing. And so this question is kind of two parts. First, to share what were some unique opportunities that you got to experience with this fellowship, because there are some people watching who might be interested in applying for the Changemaker Fellowship, or they just might want to know, how is NDN Collective supporting these fellows? And so if now you can talk about what the fellowship year has been like for you, and then what's coming up next now that you're done. And so two parts again. What has this past fellowship year been like for you, and what were some highlights, and what's coming up next for you? And while you're sharing what's coming up next, we'll be sure to share some links in the chat so that our viewers can make sure to follow and support your work as well. So we'll go back to Edith to respond first to this. Like, what has been unique about this past fellowship year, and what is coming up next for you after you close out the fellowship.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Este año justo lo compartía con
Well, this year,
el grupo de becarios.
I was sharing it with the fellows
Nicole, que le tocó acompañarnos.
Nicole, when
La verdad
she came
que
here
llegó
and
en
was
un
with
momento
us.
como muy simbólico a
And
nivel
there
personal.
came to be a very
Estuve a
symbolic
punto
moment
de
for me
no
at a personal
aceptar la
level
beca,
when I
pero
accepted
entendí
the
que
fellowship
había
and I
una misión.
understood that there was
Justo fue el día en que
a
mi
mission that I
abuelo
had,
estaba
and it
siendo
was the
entregado a la
day
tierra,
that we
había
were
trascendido y fue como muy simbólico, ¿no?
putting my
recibir la
grandfather into the
noticia
ground.
de la
I
beca,
received the
porque era con
notice,
quien
the
iba
news
a
that
trabajar, pero
I had
creo que
received the fellowship and I was
este
going to
año me ha
work with
servido
him.
como
But I think
para
that this
ir
year is really
clarificando, ¿no?
has helped
Justo
me
el
to
camino que
really
está por venir
clarify
y que
and
hace falta,
understand the road
recorrerse.
ahead of me and the road that I have, the path that I
Creo
have to
que
take.
la beca, pues
And I
ya
think that the
André
fellowship,
comentaba, ¿no? A mí me
Andre
parece como
was
muy,
saying
muy
that it
valioso
seems
como,
like
como
something so
pensar un poco
valuable, like to
en
think
que en
about
medio de todo este activismo,
in
esta lucha
in the middle of
histórica
all
que
this
traemos desde nuestras
activism and this
ancestros y la
historical
lucha que traen los pueblos por sí
struggle
mismos,
that we've had with from our
este tiempo
ancestors, we've
como de
carried on
pausar,
from
este
them,
tiempo de revisar
and
el
this
camino que hay
time
detrás,
to really reflect about
los
what we've
nuevos
done
retos, estas
and the new challenges
dificultades,
that
el
are
nuevo
facing that we're
panorama
facing,
de riesgo, de
and the
peligros,
risk and the danger that we may have to
pues sí,
go
justo
through,
retos a los que nos vamos a
and
enfrentar
these
con estas
these
desconexiones que hay
really
de
these
los vínculos con
challenges
el
that we are
territorio, de las
going to
amenazas
face
permanentes,
with these permanent threats that we're
y de, bueno,
facing, these
de todas las
being
imposiciones que
disconnected from
siguen,
our
¿no?
territories and
Vorazmente
these
mirando nuestra
impositions that
vida
we're facing
comunitaria, nuestros
in
territorios,
our
nuestra
community
cultura,
life, in our
nuestros saberes.
territory, our culture, our
Y
knowledge.
a mí se me
All
hizo
these are
como muy
being threatened
valioso
and being
tener como
affected.
un
So I
momento,
think it's
¿no?
really
Como
important, very
de poder
valuable to
sistematizar, de
have
poder
this time
sentar el
to
corazón, o sea, de
really
poder
be in touch with my heart
no solo
and
descansarlo,
not
sino
just
decir,
to
bueno,
rest,
¿cómo
but
lo
also to
reanimo, no?
say,
¿Cómo no me decepciono de que el
how
camino
do I
todavía es muy
really
largo? ¿Cómo
think that,
no,
well, not to get
pues
disappointed
cómo
and
no,
get like
pues me decepciono,
discouraged
porque
to
a veces
think that
idealizamos
this
mucho las luchas,
road is,
queremos
I
que todo
still
el mundo
have
se
so much road
comprometa,
ahead of me.
que todo el mundo
We
jale
want
parejo,
everybody to
decimos.
get involved. And sometimes
Pero
this,
es
people don't, so we
importante
get
como
a little
justo
bit
ver, ¿no?
disillusioned, but it's important to
Cómo
see
jugamos ese papel de
how
ser
we play that
guardianas,
role to
guardianes,
be
pues aquí
guardians.
traemos como por ahí toda esta carga y esta
And we
memoria
have this
ancestral.
burden and
¿Y
we
qué
have
es la
this
parte bonita
ancestral
que
memory.
queremos
And
compartirle
what's
al
the
mundo,
beautiful
¿no?
thing
¿Y
that
por
we
qué
want to share
queremos
with the world?
colocar
Why is it
nuestras
that
maneras de
we
mirar el
want
mundo, de
to
mirar la vida,
share our
como
world
una alternativa,
perspective
¿no?
as an
Como que por ahí
alternative?
vamos a tener que
And
darle
how we look at the
este
world
nuevo
as another way of look,
pues
another
camino
choice,
que
another
estamos
perspective.
emprendiendo.
As
Tenemos que
we
ser más
go along
creativos,
on
más
our path, we have
dinámicos,
to be more
ante el
creative,
contexto que
more
se está
dynamic
moviendo el
when we're
capital,
faced with
pero creo que hay
these
como
different
esperanza. A mí
contexts
me dio
of
como
capitalism.
un año de mucha
So,
esperanza,
but this
de
year I had
mucho
a lot of
soñar,
hope
de empezar
and
a
to be able
aterrizar
to
como estos proyectos
dream
muy
and
concretos
to
con las
start
mujeres
these
tejedoras,
different
hacia dónde
projects,
estamos mirando
like with the
el
women
tema del
weavers,
autocuidado, el tema de la
how we
autonomía
deal with
de la vida.
self-care, autonomy,
Y en el caso
and
de
how we
los
take care of our
pequeños, las
lives,
pequeñas,
and
niños, niñas,
thinking about the
niñes,
young
es
young
pues
boys and
mirar, ¿no?
girls,
Cómo queremos
to see
transformar
how we want
esa
to
vida y que en
transform
medio de toda la
life for
violencia,
them,
precariedad
that in
que se está
spite of the
viviendo, pues
precarious
que
ways of
sigan
life
mirando, ¿no?
and
En los pueblos
violence,
una
maybe that
posibilidad de
in
los
the communities
territorios
we
donde
can still
habitan,
have a
una posibilidad
possibility
para sobrevivir
to
pues ante
continue
el exterminio que estamos
surviving,
padeciendo.
even though
Y yo creo que es
many of our
con lo
communities
que
are being
me quedo, vamos
exterminated.
a
So
seguir ahí
to continue to have
insistiendo en
hope
ese
and to
camino.
continue resisting,
Termino con una
to
frase,
continue with this
la
path.
escribiré en
And
el
I'm
chat,
going to
pero siempre es con lo que me hace
end
como
with
repensar,
a
¿no? Mi día a día.
phrase, and I'll
Siempre
write it
cuando
in the
se
chat,
reúne
but every
la
time
gente mayor
when
en los
people get
pueblos,
together,
dicen,
in the older people in our
Tiquillo y
communities,
Chichini y
she's
Nayata.
saying it in her
Eso
language.
significa
And
como,
what that
o sea,
means
siempre
is
cuando uno no sabe hacia
when you
dónde
don't
mirar,
know where to
hacia dónde
go
encontrar esa
or
respuesta
where to
es,
find that
o sea,
answer
cómo
that you're looking
recojamos,
for,
cómo nosotros
how
volvemos al camino que
do
llevaron
how
nuestros
we go
antepasados,
back
¿no?
to the
Y
road
dentro
that
de ese
our
camino tenemos
ancestors
que
were on,
elegir
and
lo que
with
nos
on
hace
that
fuertes
path
como
we
pueblos,
have to
lo que
choose
nos
things
hace
that make us
fuertes como
strong as
mujeres
a
y que
people,
lo que
as
nos hace
women,
fuerte
that makes us
como
strong
humanidad, ¿no? O sea,
as
siempre mirar esa
humanity,
parte, ¿no? Que nos
always looking at
fortalece el
that part.
corazón
What
y el
is it that
espíritu.
strengthens
Pues yo
our
con eso
heart and our
terminaría.
spirit?
Muchas gracias.
So with that, I'll end. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Edith. And a quick follow-up question for you now too. And now that the fellowship has come to a close, what's coming up for you? What will you be working on now?
Pues en construir la autonomía.
Well, to continue constructing autonomy, it's complicated, but we are like doing an assessment of the road that's ahead of us. If we don't want state financing because it's really harmed our communities, then how can we have that economic autonomy? And so we're going to be concentrating on that, on how to sustain our movement and our projects without involving the state. And we really hope that we can consolidate this proposal with the Zanavi little school, like to be itinerary school, and to go around to the different territories and really to unite our communities, even though they're divided by state borders. So that's what I want to work on. Thank you.
Thank you, Edith. And we look forward to following your work and supporting in whatever way that we can. It has been an honor to visit with you and in this past year of your journey. We'll go to Heber next to share with us just your own personal reflections from the fellowship. What has been really meaningful for you in this experience with the NDN Changemaker Fellowship in the past year? And also, what are you going to be working on when the fellowship is all complete?
Pues ha sido muy profundo escuchar a cada una, ¿no? Cada uno de los compañeros becarios y recoger, ¿no? Como muchos aprendizajes en este año, muchos aprendizajes, mucha sabiduría. Para mí este año de becario significó un punto de detenerme a reflexionar, a revisar, ¿no? Mi proceso personal, mi proceso de lucha, mi proceso familiar, ¿no? Y el tener las condiciones de poder detenerme fue para mí muy importante, porque en maya utilizamos una palabra también que decimos "Soknaka Tushaibe", que significa hemos llegado en una encrucijada, ¿no? Y en esa encrucijada uno tiene que tomar, ¿no? Como caminos que tienen que ver con entender, ¿no? Lo que continúa.
So we are at this crossroad and we need to choose, and on many occasions we repeat the same roads over and over again, and those are not roads that work. So we need to learn from those mistakes, and we need to learn to recognize our mistakes and the bad decisions we have made in the past. So sometimes without the conditions we cannot do that. So for me, this fellowship was having time to stop and reflect, but it also meant strengthening myself and strengthening the work that I do in the community with the Seeds Collective, and together we were able to do something important, something that helps us all see what we can do together. So the next steps, what follows, I would say it's what's next. So we will keep building autonomy, self-determination, helping our well-being. So this fellowship, what does as well is create community and network and connecting with other territories and other brothers and sisters who also keep fighting and who are fighting for life, because that's what we're fighting for, life. We're also very excited and happy, very hopeful, at least after the first encounter we had of Mexican fellows. it was very inspiring. We were able to see each other, to hug each other. And that was something great for me. It did not only represent an encounter to see each other, but to recognize each other in our roads. And that was in huge measure thanks to the resources provided from this fellowship. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Heber. I heard of that gathering, and that sounded really amazing, and just really honored that you all are joining us here and sharing with us some insight from your homelands and your people, from just even the reflections on the past year, and as you said, like building a network and building community. And a lot of times, I guess, our geographic isolation, in the past, we addressed that, like with trade routes. Tribes always interacted with each other and traveled very, very far. And now there's different barriers like language and having resources and violence and colonialism. But now with the advent of technology, our geographic isolation can be overcome in unique ways where we can connect with like-minded people, as you mentioned, and build network and be like, there are people like me, but in other communities fighting these same things, and we draw strength from each other. And I know that I felt that a lot in what you've shared so far, and just having the just massive privilege of hearing all of your reflections here. So thank you so much. All right. Andre, you're going to close this out. So what were some highlights for you for the past year of this fellowship, and what's coming up next for you? How can we support your work?
Okay, cool. So, you know, some of the unique opportunities that were presented through the fellowship was really the focus on self-improvement, the self-assessment that we took with feedback from our peers, that sort of leadership assessment. I was able to submit that assessment to 14 of my peers, and all of them responded back. And so it was an opportunity for me to learn about myself, more deeper, kind of introspective look at my strengths and weaknesses, and where I can focus on for self-improvement in terms of my leadership and community engagement. So that was really important for me. I also took that kind of self-assessment and time of introspection over into my family and my parenting skills. And I started looking at, you know, how am I parenting? How am I engaging with my family? And so there was a lot of, I think, personal growth, looking at better ways to engage with my family and discipline my children, or, you know, engage in community organizing. So that was one thing, the self-assessment focus. The fellowship allowed me to do something that I always wanted to do, which was I've always, as an activist organizer, I understand the importance of controlling your own narrative and, you know, being in control of your media outputs. So I've always wanted to learn some media skills for the work that I do, and the fellowship allowed me to purchase camera equipment, you know, good quality media gear, and take classes at the nearby local community college. So I was able to take some videography classes and acquire gear that enables me to like do my own documentation, tell my own story, you know, from my own lens and my own like real world experience. It would be difficult for me to acquire this kind of camera gear training without the fellowship. Of course, the ability to network with all the other fellows and develop relationships, and get to know about other people's struggles and what kind of resistance is happening in other places. That was really important. As an organizer, I understand that developing relationships is critical to the kind of work that I do. The fellowship allowed me to get some, it hasn't happened yet due to the pandemic, but the fellowship has allowed me to create a budget to get some one-on-one mentoring with my carving teacher in New Zealand, Aotearoa. So because of the pandemic, I haven't been able to make that trip, but it looks like I'll be able to make it near the end of summer, spend a month with my carving mentor and teacher and really develop out, continue to develop my carving skills and my carving leadership as the leader of a carving group or apprenticeship. So those kinds of things, the self-improvement, the personal growth, the ability to access learning and tools to enhance the work that I do were really important. And the health and wellness focus was huge. Since the fellowship started, I focused more on my health and wellness, and I lost about 25 pounds in weight. I was able to purchase a bicycle and start riding, which was important for me as I had a knee surgery that did not rehab very well. What's next on the horizon for me and Hawaii and the work that we do? We're expanding our carving program into va'a canoes, canoe carving, traditional Hawaiian canoes that are carved from one-piece logs. I'm partnering with Native Organizers Alliance to develop a Hawaiian-focused organizing training camp here in Hawaii sometime later this year or early next year. So really bringing the opportunity of organizing skills training to Hawaii so that we can help develop and teach our people, to get better at organizing. I'm working on a nonviolent direct action camp, similar to what we see with Greenpeace Action Camp, to have the first action camp in Hawaii where we teach nonviolent direct action skills, and hoping to partner with hopefully NDN and IP3, Indigenous Peoples Power Project. And the big picture on the horizon is I'm planning, if everything works out, to acquire some land back home on Kauai to develop out a Hawaiian cultural center, a place where we can gather to teach, learn, share Hawaiian culture, and a place to organize and develop out our training programs, and to have a place for the Hawaiian community to come and learn and share, and and bring in our politics into that space as well. Here in Hawaii, we have a lot of multicultural diversity because of the sugarcane industry. A lot of immigrants came to Hawaii in the early 1900s or the late 1800s. Of Japanese, Chinese, Filipino, etc. And you can see that there's Japanese cultural centers in Hawaii, Chinese cultural centers, Filipino cultural centers, etc., etc. But there's no Hawaiian space. There's no Hawaiian cultural centers, And as the indigenous people of land, the Aboriginal people who was here first, since before Jesus, I think it's important that we have a space to for Hawaiians to control and to have a place to organize and learn and teach. So my big dream is to develop a type of Hawaiian cultural center that's both cultural and political. Yeah, that's some of it.
And I'm sure that's just scratching the surface, but that's all amazing. And the part about like the self-improvement, I think I am thinking of the leadership training, the art of leadership, which is that devoted place to allow you all to really focus on your own self-improvement. And so I really enjoyed hearing how that was meaningful for you and how that impacted so many different realms of your life. So I know that I'm definitely like super inspired by everything that was shared here so far from everybody, and just would love to like just keep talking more and more. But we did hear what's coming up for you all, and we'll make sure to share some resources in the chat and links in the chat for our viewers to follow. But once again, like a huge privilege and honor and blessing to hear your stories and hear words from your heart, from your homelands, to hear some of your indigenous languages on this call as well has been really beautiful. And I know that many folks from NDN Collective and from the foundation team and the Changemaker team have already expressed their well wishes to you all in the future. And although this fellowship is coming to a close, we're still your partners and relatives here who want to continue supporting your work. And we're connected. We'd love to continue to like amplify what you're working on and put out calls to action as you're out there fighting for your people. We have an audience following our platforms, and we'll make sure that we keep them informed on what you all are up to so that they can support. And even if it's just sharing something on social media or donating a few dollars, we want to make sure that your work is sustained and that you're supported for as long as you need that support. So thank you once again, everyone. And that will close out our conversation. The fifth panel for the NDN Changemaker Showcase was another beautiful one. Also want to say a big old thank you to our interpreters behind the scenes, Carolina and Rebecca. That is not easy work, and it really has been magical to allow us all to like hear and learn from each other. I don't know when I would ever be able to like have these conversations, and I just feel really honored. So I can't express enough how much we appreciate you all behind the scenes, Rebecca and Carolina, for doing that work just so seamlessly and gracefully. I also want to thank our producers behind the scenes, Willie White, Steph Vieira, and Lorenzo Serna for managing the production of this show. A big thank you and gratitude to our other hosts, Penalise and Nicole, who hosted some of our other panels, and for all the work they've done with the fellowship. To our whole grant-making team, and especially Director of Grant-Making, Tina Kukan, and Managing Director of Indian Foundation, Gabby Strong, and the whole foundation team that were a part of supporting the NDN Changemaker Fellowship and a lot of our other opportunities. It's just such a privilege to help you all, and you all have definitely blessed us too. Also, and I'm going down the list of all the thank yous because this closes out our showcase. A big thank you to all of our musical performers who have been a part of the showcase as well: Mike Jordan, Lila June Johnston, and Mato Wayuhi. And if folks who have enjoyed this programming would like to learn more about the NDN Changemaker Fellowship, you can learn more at our website. Go to ndncollective.org. Check out our grant section, or you can also go to grants.ndncollective.org. Oh, I'm sorry, it's grantmaking@ndncollective.org. We'll make sure to put those links in the chat too, so you can learn more about the NDN Changemaker Fellowship. I also mentioned the Community Action Fund that we offer beyond colonial borders as well, in Canada, in the United States, and Mexico, and surrounding island nations. So if you're doing frontline actions defending your people, your rights, and need resources, there's a grant opportunity that is currently open, and that window is open into the fall, I want to say until October. So we're going to close out this session. As much as we would just want to like keep visiting, we're going to close out with a performance by Mato Wayuhi, Oglala Lakota, multidisciplinary artist. And a big thank you again for all of our viewers for sticking in there with us. Have a good evening. Take care.
Well, everybody, it's that time of day. We are on our last song for the evening. Once again, my name is Mato Wayuhi. It's been a pleasure being here with you today. And this last song is called Stone Cold Lover.
Howdy do, I am a stone cold lover. I love you. Fuck you, I am a stone cold killer too. Tell you what, let's break some whole grain before I take your whole brain and bash it, smash it, and remake the frame. Don't wanna make you feel like any type of way, so stop running. cause you won't get away. Half of me wants to give it all up to you. Half of me saying, psh, you can miss me with that. I'm seeking truth, what do I do? Oh, just a stone cold lover, I love you. Fuck you, I am a stone cold killer too. Stone cold killer too. Just a stone cold lover, I love you. Fuck you, I am a stone cold killer too. Stone cold killer too. Stone cold. I said I'm stone cold. Been building up some barriers to keep me sane, and they would all fall if someone would claim on that Lone Star status, that cowboy fabric be killing all the Indian in me. I can't stand it. I love it. Trusting you is like Pharrell just frontin', fibbing for affection. Never been about that function. If it's fiction, I might fuck around and stop you breathing before you take my breath away. Don't wanna be judged on my doing. Jerry steady construing, constructing my ruin with the shade they tossing and crewing. Wonder what they say when I do pop, clean the stage and rock pavement, making shake quick the shackles off Mato Wayuhi. The name is so sacred, so treated as treaties and never do break it. Woo. I said Mato Wayuhi, the name is so sacred, so treated as treaties and never do break it. Thank you for having me so much. Just a stone cold lover, I love you. But fuck you, I am a stone cold killer too. I am a stone cold killer too. Just a stone cold lover, I love you. But fuck you, I am a stone cold killer too. I'm a stone cold killer too. Stone cold. I said I'm stone cold. Mato Wayuhi machapelo hechetsula. Stone cold, I'm stone cold. Stone cold, I'm stone cold. Stone cold, I'm stone cold. Thank you so much for having me. Even though I'm so stone cold.